Tonight, as you know, we're talking about United States policy toward East Asia and the Pacific, and we're so fortunate to have the Assistant Secretary with us. We've approached these questions of the region from several angles, as you know. We've had Professor Mersheimer of Chicago raising the question of whether China can rise peacefully, and Professor Lampton of Johns Hopkins SAIS wondered whether we can get along with one another. And then Michael O'Hanlon addressed the Asian question specifically, Michael being the co-author of a book with the former Deputy Secretary Steinberg. But tonight we have the authoritative voice, the one who has been one of the architects of the pivot to Asia, and now occupies the senior State Department position with respect to that part of the world. And the title is appropriate in that it is broad, and indeed the pivot toward Asia is broad because it points to the military alliances in the area. It points to the potential joining in numerous organizations within the area, and without pointing at China. But the question of the region, and China in particular, remain with us, and we're delighted to have the authoritative voice on the subject. The Assistant Secretary is a veteran of Asian affairs. He interestingly, by the way, he's from Sarah Lawrence College. I don't know how many State Department hardliners there are from Sarah Lawrence. But in any case, he's a product of St. Lawrence. I'm sorry, not St. Lawrence, Sarah Lawrence. Both my wife and one of my daughters are St. Lawrence, and I can't stop doing that. But in any case, he as I imagine some Sarah Lawrence people do, he traveled after graduation, spent time in Japan, where he studied the language and martial arts. When he joined the and he also managed a Japanese firm for a half a dozen of years in New York City before joining the State Department. He was an assistant to Mike Mansfield upon joining the State Department in Japan, served as a consul in Japan before returning to the States. In his long career at the State Department, he's had a number of Japanese assignments again, and he served within the Bureau as director of the Japanese Affairs Desk. And then, of course, and he was stationed in Seoul for a tour. He interjected into his tours focusing upon Asia, DCM in Cyprus, and again in the Netherlands. He served as an advisor, political advisor, to Thomas Pickering when he was our UN ambassador, and then again as chief of staff to Mr. Pickering when he was at the State Department as undersecretary. More recently and immediately, he is one of those that had a strong voice in the pivot. He was on the National Security Council, first as director for Japan and North and South Korea, and then as the senior director for Asian affairs. And of course that position also carries with it being the president's advisor on that area for Asian affairs. His work has been extensive in the area in which we're interested in. He's been one of the architects of the policy in that direction. So for all of us who have wonders about the meaning of the pivot and the question of the relationship with China today especially, we're absolutely delighted to have the Assistant Secretary join us. It's my great pleasure to present the Assistant Secretary.
Well, Frank, thank you very much for that introduction. I don't think I could have recapped my career as precisely and comprehensively as you did without a teleprompter. So I'm impressed. It's really a pleasure for me to be here with the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs to talk about U.S. Policy towards East Asia and the Pacific. I appreciate the opportunity to explain our policies and to connect outside the Beltway with friends and colleagues and citizens. And I'm interested in your feedback and look forward to the give and take in the Q&A session. This morning at the senior staff meeting that we hold with Secretary Kerry, he underscored to me and to the other regional assistant secretaries the importance that he places on engaging with Americans and explaining both our policies and our achievements. This is true. We had this conversation this morning, and he was passionate about the need in the aftermath, for example, of President Obama's speech to West Point, for us to get out and give more substance to the answer to the question, what are we doing and why? And I've found in my career it doesn't hurt to make your boss happy. So here I am. While I am an adopted, transplanted Marylander too, the crabs aren't as good in that part of the state. So I'm happy to be in Baltimore for those reasons as well. As Frank mentioned, I've worked on Asia policy in the State Department and in the White House for quite a while. And as Frank also mentioned, I started my career working for former Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield, which was a tremendous honor. So I learned quickly in my Foreign Service career, and I have seen countless times since then, the importance and the contributions of the members of Congress, the other branch of government, and particularly of individual senators contributing to our country's international relations. Now, I know Congress doesn't poll very well at home, but overseas, the Congress embodies American democracy. And when members of Congress travel, as I strongly encourage them to do in my job now, and as I welcomed them when I was stationed overseas, and when they meet with world leaders and foreign officials, people listen, the world listens. So it's very important, in my view, to have members of Congress who are willing to get out of town, get out of their constituencies, travel overseas, and to have members who are thoughtful, who are erudite, who are knowledgeable, and who can speak effectively, both for the purposes of engaging foreign governments, but also for the purpose of foreign affairs. And I think, and this is honest and not shameless of me, I think Marylanders are very lucky to have a leader like that in the Senate in the person of Ben Cardin, Senator Cardin, who is chairman of the Foreign Relations Subcommittee on East Asia and the Pacific, my committee. It's not only that he consented after my confirmation hearing to give me this job, but in many hearings thereafter, I've always valued his advice and appreciated his counsel and advocacy for strong U.S. involvement in Asia. And so it's a privilege for me to work with him. He's in Vietnam right now and en route to the Shangri-La Dialogue, the annual security dialogue that's hosted by the government of Singapore. And there he'll participate in a wide range of foreign policy discussions at a particularly important moment in Asia affairs. I also, of course, want to recognize the contribution of your other senator, Senator Mikulski, who's also a very strong supporter of diplomacy, supporter of development, both as chair of the Appropriations Committee, but also as a leader on the Intelligence Committee. So your blessed to have two really outstanding senators. The curtains are drawn, but the port just below us, the port of Baltimore, I know is older than the United States. I think I saw it on the podium here. And it's a reminder to me that Baltimore has always been a player in international trade and thus in Americans' relations with the world. And that really gets at the foundation of President Obama's policy toward the Asia-Pacific region. It's a policy that's built on a simple idea, namely that the region is hugely important, hugely consequential to the United States. The broader Asia-Pacific region from the Pacific coast of the Americas through the island nation of the Pacific to Australia and the Asian continent, this constitutes over half of the world's people and economic output. So within that area, the East Asia Pacific region that I'm responsible for accounts for about a third of the world's people and a quarter of global economic output. And those numbers are steadily growing. So for the United States as a resident Pacific power and as a trading nation, we depend on a stable and a prosperous Asia. The Asia-Pacific region truly matters to the U.S. It matters to our security. It matters to our economic future. So when the Obama administration came into office, and although I'm a career civil servant, not a political person, I was seconded from the State Department to help out, we looked at how our government's resources were distributed, our diplomatic and development, our assets, our personnel, our funding, our military assets, the time and the attention of our senior leadership. And it was clear that the distribution of resources just didn't match the importance of the region, weren't commensurate with our objectives and our goals there. The distribution was out of balance. And so over the last 5+ years, we've worked to rebalance. And what that means really is strengthening our alliances, strengthening our partnerships, building up regional institutions, engaging with emerging powers, China, of course, with Indonesia. And I think perhaps what I could do tonight is to, in those three baskets, to sketch out a little bit on what we have done and why. First and foremost, we have strengthened and reinvigorated our relations with our 5 treaty allies in the region: Australia, Japan and Korea, the Philippines, and despite the recent political setback, Thailand. We've upgraded our economic and our trade engagement. For example, with the Republic of Korea, we negotiated to conclusion and ratified the KORUS, Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, and we have worked over the past 1.5 years, going on 2 years, to fully implement it. We are deep in negotiations on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which includes a range of allies and partners from within the Pacific Rim. And importantly, we've worked hard to strengthen our security cooperation with our allies, from our work with Japan and with the Republic of Korea to counter the North Korean nuclear threat, to the new defense cooperation agreement, really a groundbreaking, innovative agreement that was signed and announced just last month during President Obama's trip to the Philippines. The list goes on. There's our rotational deployment of Marines to Australia, which is hugely important, and a number of other innovations that are seen and are reflections of the strength of our alliance, as was the recent visit of President Obama, not only to the Philippines, but also to Japan, Korea, and to a new friend and security partner, Malaysia, which hadn't seen a visit by a U.S. president for 40-some-odd years. At the same time, we have rededicated ourselves to collaborating with other friends, not allies, but important security partners like New Zealand, like Singapore, like Taiwan, with the Pacific Island nations. And importantly, we have, by virtue of the tremendous political transformation in Burma, begun developing a new level of engagement with that country. Beyond alliances and security partnerships and cooperation, the second area of focus for us over the last 5 years, as I mentioned, has been helping to build up the region's institutions. Those are security institutions as well as economic institutions. One important example is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, a group not formed by us, but by countries in the region that see elements of a shared destiny and also, of course, have significant shared concerns. The U.S. was the first non-ASEAN nation to set up a dedicated mission to ASEAN at its headquarters in Jakarta. President Obama, who personally made the decision to join the treaty and begin participating in annual meetings with ASEAN, now on an annual basis participates in the East Asia Summit, which is a meeting of 18 of the Asia-Pacific leaders, which are convened and chaired by ASEAN. And he meets annually with the 10 ASEAN leaders themselves. In APEC, which is the Economic Cooperation Forum, we work very closely with 20-member economies from across the region to expand trade and investment, to promote sustainable growth, and to strengthen regional ties. President Obama will be traveling to Beijing in November to attend the APEC meeting there, which will be hosted by the Chinese. I also mentioned that we are deep in negotiations for the TPP. And the TPP is a hugely ambitious and a hugely important project. It is to be a comprehensive and an inclusive and a high-standard agreement that we're convinced will promote growth and create jobs, certainly here in the United States, but also throughout the region. And as it currently stands with Japan as a negotiating partner, TPP will constitute something on the order of 40% of global GDP. So these regional institutions and these agreements are becoming an important part of the international system in the 21st century. And it's worth putting this in context because the international system, a lot of which we tend to take for granted, is really unique. It's really unprecedented. For instance, never before have people and companies and nations been able to travel or trade more freely than they do today. We all, I think, tend to take for granted our ability to travel and to fly overseas. We think about how much it costs, but we seldom think about how the global network of treaties and agreements and institutions, whether it's ICAO, the Civil Aviation Organization, or something else, how they make that possible. The point is that these elements of the international system, these global and regional organizations, provide other long-term benefits because beyond what you read about any single meeting or accomplishment, working through these bodies, and this is something I've learned in my career, inculcates a mindset of cooperation. And it fosters habits of cooperation, through working together on a daily basis, that genuinely helps not only diplomats, but leaders, political leaders and military leaders as well, work to peacefully resolve disputes and to advance each other's developments. And as countries see the value of working together on a growing range of issues, this mindset and the structures that support it become more and more self-sustaining. And so too does the shared understanding that it's the rules and the norms, not national size, population, not national power, not military power. It's the rules and the norms that govern outcomes, that allow us to resolve disagreements in a peaceful and in a durable way. No question that every group is different, every situation is different, but the benefits of regional and global cooperation, the benefits of regional integration are crystal clear. And today in the Asia and the Pacific region, these institutions are driving real accomplishments. Whether it's working together and ASEAN working with China toward a code of conduct for governing the behavior of claimants in the South China Sea, or whether it's improving the management of shared resources like fisheries, which are vital to the economies and the well-being of so much of the Asia-Pacific, whether it's avoiding pandemics and eradicating diseases that have historically been the scourge of so much of Asia, whether it's addressing the pollution that doesn't respect borders. Whatever the agenda, our support of regional institutions is important to the U.S., and I can attest, is important to the President. It's the driver behind his decision to actively engage with ASEAN, actively engage with APEC, and to participate in the multilateral life of the region. As the U.S., we've also championed initiatives that bring neighbors in the region closer to us and closer to each other. A really powerful example is what we call the Lower Mekong Initiative, which is bringing together the Mekong countries, Burma, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, helping them to work together to tackle common challenges. That means education, that means infrastructure, that means agriculture and food security, that means protecting the environment. These are cross-border, transboundary challenges that they each share and that can only be solved through cooperation. And I think the U.S. serves as the catalyst that facilitates that cooperation. The third broad area that's governed our strategy and our approach in this rebalance effort is our engagement with emerging powers. And by this, emerging powers, we've traditionally meant our engagement with countries like Indonesia, for example, with which we have built a comprehensive partnership and with whom we hold annual joint commission meetings that bring our agencies together on a very wide range of issues. Or India, as an example. Although India as a country doesn't fall within my remit as Assistant Secretary for East Asia, I hold regular and very productive bilateral consultations on East Asia with my Indian counterparts, as well as regular trilateral meetings with Indian officials and Japanese officials to coordinate on Asia-Pacific issues. And of course, and most prominently as the emerging power, China. And I'd like to talk a little bit about China. I know, as Frank said, you've heard from Mike Lampton and O'Hanlon and some great people. It's plausible that a broader definition of emerging powers could someday include countries like Vietnam, like Malaysia, and we hope Burma. And these are countries with whom certainly in the last 5 years we've engaged in active and I think transformative diplomacy to significantly improve our bilateral relations. A big part of that is expanding people-to-people ties. It's hugely important in Asia, and it's especially important with these emerging powers. We've increased these connections through a number of programs, one of which on the trip I accompanied President Obama on in April included the rollout of something we're calling the Young Southeast Asia Leaders Initiative. And it was at that session that President Obama wound up speaking to a phenomenal group of about 300 young people from all 10 Southeast Asian countries, in which they asked him incredibly deep and personal questions and elicited from him incredibly deep and personal answers, including things that I and very close advisors to the president had really never heard him talk about his mother, about his first failures, about his hopes and aspirations. It was very powerful, and our engagement with youth from across the region reflects something important, and I think gets at something important. I think it reflects the tremendous pull that the United States has as an attractive and innovative society. That we have something that young people throughout the world, and particularly in the United States, want to tap into, a spirit of innovation, of enterprise, of entrepreneurship, and of freedom. I think it also reflects our commitment to help invest in the region and develop a pattern of engagement with men and women in particular, who will soon be leaders throughout the Asia-Pacific region. So this is how I would organize in sort of 3 chunks the way that we have approached the region, and I think they support and reinforce each other. One, because strengthening our alliances provides a foundation for security in the region and gives countries the strength and the confidence and the space to move forward in advancing their collective interests and in building up the regional institutions. Now, unforeseen challenges, the coup in Thailand, which was so unfortunate and problematic, those things can strain and do strain relations with an ally. But there are also challenges that bring us closer together. Against the backdrop of terrible loss of life and devastation from Super Typhoon Haiyan, our support for the Philippines, along with that of other allies, our ability to mobilize quickly and to aid not only in the immediate rescue but in the longer-term relief and reconstruction, that's been a bright spot in our engagement. By the same token, building up the institutions in the region, as I said, in turn helps Asia develop rules of the road. And those rules, which need to be developed by and with and for the countries concerned, provide an environment for trade and prosperity and for problem solving. So I think our engagement with emerging powers makes clear that the U.S. is committed to partnerships and to collaboration. It shows we're committed to building a positive sum set of relationships. And it shows, as the President has repeatedly said, that the United States is prepared and does welcome the peaceful rise of countries like China. So I know that the billing for the event indicated that for the U.S. government, for the Obama administration, our relations with China stand as a hugely important component of our overall policy. And as I promised I would, let me talk a little bit about the administration's approach to the U.S.-China relationship. So, have we pursued the rebalance with China? Yes. How have we pursued it? By committing to develop a bilateral relationship in which we expand the areas of cooperation, practical cooperation, cooperation on issues that genuinely matter to both of us and both of our citizens, and a relationship in which we constructively manage differences, not paper them over and not run away from them. So by agreeing that both sides, China and the United States, have to continue actively to develop stable and constructive bilateral relations and avoid a drift toward strategic rivalry, and by strengthening our engagement with China at all levels, our strategy has helped to promote the mutual understanding of one another's intentions, and in doing so, significantly reduces the risk of miscalculation. By expanding our engagement at the highest levels, for example, President Obama, by my count, has met with his Chinese counterparts some 19 times. Secretary Kerry and other cabinet secretaries regularly meet with their counterparts. By expanding engagement at senior levels, we can build and maintain the relationships that we need to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves and to address a wide range of serious concerns that we have. An important element in our engagement with China is our high-level strategic and economic dialogue. This is a regular, an annual dialogue between governments and agencies that's jointly chaired on the U.S. side by Secretary Kerry and Secretary Liu, Department of State, Department of Treasury, and their counterparts on the Chinese side. Over time, it has evolved into a really key forum for both sides to achieve progress on shared objectives. We have 2 full days of very intense senior engagement. We alternate between Washington and Beijing. This year in July, we'll have what we call the SNED in China. And we use this set of meetings to candidly engage on the areas where we disagree, where we have differences, to talk through our strategies and our policies, and to work on practical steps that we can each take to expand areas of cooperation, particularly on issues that will not yield easily to solutions unless the United States and China are cooperating on them. The dialogue brings together broad interagency and senior teams from both governments. We tackle some really tough bilateral and regional and global issues. We work on the denuclearization of North Korea, the Korean Peninsula, hugely important. We work hard on climate change and related issues of the environment. We work on regional hotspots like Syria and the elimination of its chemical weapons stockpile. We work on food security, water security, maritime security. We work on global health. We talk about human rights. We work on economic rebalancing, commerce, trade, investment, finance. We talk about energy security. A big component of the SNED, of course, is the economic agenda. And our economies are closely intertwined, increasingly intertwined with investment flowing in both directions. Just in the last 15 years, I think the cumulative Chinese investment has gone, that's Chinese investment in the United States, has gone from pretty close to zero to something on the order of $36 billion. And the State Department and our embassy, our mission in China, has done a tremendous amount to facilitate that. The commercial service under the Department of Commerce has opened new offices in China. And last year, we and the Chinese agreed to pursue high-standard bilateral investment treaty, something that will level the playing field for U.S. firms that operate in China and create jobs here. As I mentioned, we cooperate intensively on the environment and environmental protection. Last year, Secretary Kerry and his counterpart, the state counselor, created a high-level climate change working group that's made significant progress and is the world's two largest emitters. There's no better example of a problem that can't be solved if we're working at cross purposes or not cooperating. And we cooperate on socio-cultural issues. We've got the U.S.-China consultation on people-to-people exchange that enhances our ties in culture and education, science, technology, sports, women's issues. We support Americans studying in China at levels far beyond any other country. And that support is in addition to the support we provide for Chinese students and scholars that come to study and research in the United States, including in Maryland. China is the top producer, sender of foreign students to the U.S., something on the order of 230,000 students last year. And there's a lot more that we can do and will do to expand cooperation. And the logic of our shared interests commands, I think, greater coordination and cooperation. I believe we share, and I tell my Chinese counterparts that we share an interest in upholding the rules-based international system under which China has achieved really historic levels of economic development. And the U.S. has advocated for and supported China's inclusion in a range of international multilateral fora like the WTO, like the G20, like APEC. And these groups create an environment that's conducive to China's continued economic growth. More broadly, we know that free access to information, free speech, the rule of law have been proven as the essential ingredients to unlock human potential in societies around the world. And as China works to move up the value chain and into innovative enterprises and industries to create a global creative economy, China's incentive to reform will increase as well. So these are reasons that I believe and that I tell my counterparts argue that China should strengthen its contributions to that international system it's benefited from, that China should accept the constraints that go along with being a responsible member of the international community because of the far greater benefits. The United States accepts those constraints. We lose cases in the WTO. We don't always win them. We lose votes in the UN, but we accept it because the benefits vastly outweigh the costs. Yesterday, President Obama gave a talk at West Point, and he said, America benefits when norms are not only being upheld by us individually, but where all countries buy in. And China now, as a rising power, needs to be a part of that. That's the essence of the message that we have consistently been sending to China. Look, we will always protect U.S. interests when they diverge from those of China or others. And we have and we will continue to have very real differences with China. But the question is how we deal with them and how China deals with them. The test of engagement, the test of diplomacy is whether each of us are able to expand areas of practical and meaningful cooperation on regional issues, cooperation on global issues, at the same time that we're managing our differences candidly and constructively. This is, in fact, the challenge of diplomacy writ large, working together where we can, working to resolve disagreements when they arise and do it peacefully. And that diplomacy depends not just on a handful of civil servants or the occupant of the White House. It really depends on the support and the commitment of the American people, which is one of the reasons I'm here. It's to talk to people like you who understand that our national spending on diplomacy and development is less than 1%, of the federal budget. To talk to people like you who understand why it's so important to invest in these tools. The President also said yesterday, look, this is one of the hard-learned lessons from our experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our military, from that experience, became the strongest advocate for diplomacy and for development. They understood that foreign assistance isn't an afterthought. It's not something nice to do apart from our national defense, apart from national security. It's part of what makes us strong, and that's hugely important. As he said also, when you have a hammer and when you have the world's best hammer, the temptation is to turn every problem into a nail, and they just aren't. So the bottom line for me, and what I want to share, is the conviction that relations between the United States and the countries of the Asia-Pacific region matter not just as a foreign policy matter. They matter not just to experts, but they matter to all Americans. They matter to our economy, to our security, and they matter to the advancement of our values. And they matter to Baltimore. They matter to Maryland. I know, speaking of students, that international students contribute something like $400 million a year, every year, to the economy of the state. I know that, interestingly, the almost complete expansion of the Panama Canal is going to bring a significant influx of more and more ships from the Pacific to the East Coast, including the Baltimore Harbor. I know that as a derivative in part of the shale gas energy revolution, that the rebirth of American manufacturing is creating more and more exports from Maryland and elsewhere, and that the growth of the Asia-Pacific region will create more demand for trade, more demand for our goods. So your involvement as business leaders, as academics, as engaged citizens is essential to taking full advantage of the possibilities. And so I've gone on a bit. I want to hear from you. Let me stop there, but thank you, and thank Frank and the council for letting me hear. You've listened to me, now let me listen to you. Thank you very much.
Well, we certainly do thank you for I think, outlining very nicely the content of our policy, but also suggesting the principles that are lodged within it which contribute to the international order. And I should have mentioned in the introduction, the Assistant Secretary has written a book called America's Place in the World, which is a larger question to reflect upon. But I thought very nicely your talk pointed in that direction in the implications of the constructive aspects of the specifics that you mentioned. But in any case, we thank you very much. And the floor is open for questions. Yes, sir. The questions are, what are your views of the complexities within Japanese positions today, first, and with respect to the problems of North Korea as well? Well,
let me first speak to what Japan is and isn't doing. The the Japanese government, led by Prime Minister Abe, that came into office 18 plus months ago, came in talking about revision of the Constitution, but as a matter of fact, and as a function of the domestic dialogue within the Japanese political scene, is not seeking, certainly at this juncture, to revise the Constitution. What they are now debating in their parliament is a reinterpretation of the Constitution. This is a voluntary, inherited tradition, not a law, on the question of collective self-defense. Collective self-defense is a right enshrined in the UN Charter. The right to assist a neighbor or a friend in extremists should they come under attack. It's a right that Japan, in keeping with the post-war pacifist tradition, renounced, but is discussing, contemplating, restoring, at least in part, largely to be a better ally to the United States. So the first point I would make is it's extremely important to differentiate between the noise surrounding the discussion in Japan. And after all, this is very much a decision for the Japanese people and their government to take, and they're having that conversation, and they are approaching the question in, I'd say, a very transparent way, which is important given the sensitivities of Japan's neighbors and Japan's pre-war history. But secondly, the debate in Japan about whether Japan can do more to contribute to the security of its ally, the United States, or more broadly to the stability and the security of the Asia-Pacific region, is taking place within the context of the U.S.-Japan alliance. And so there is no real constituency in Japan that holds that Japan needs an independent military capability unrelated to and disaggregated from the United States. To the contrary, the strong bias is in favor of jointness and interoperability. The second point I'd make in asking ourselves how to look at that is, what's good for us? What's good for the United States? Should we be worried? Should we be happy? Should we be encouraging? And what do we tell the Japanese, and what do we do about it? I am firmly of the view, and I happen to know that it's a view of President Obama as well, that our alliance with Japan is the cornerstone of regional security in the Asia-Pacific region. We are two powerful democracies. We are two major economies. We are closely knit friends with a tremendous overlap in values and shared interests. The last 70 years is a story of extraordinary peaceful contributions by Japan to the world and to its neighborhood. Japan has not fired a shot in anger in 70 years. Would that the United States, China, or others could say the same. So a Japan that is active and that is capable in defense terms as an ally and a security partner is a good thing for the United States. We're not worried. Secondly, a Japan that is diplomatically influential, whose voice is heard and respected throughout the region and the world, is a good thing, because what that voice will say as a democracy and a free market economy is seldom different from what we believe or what we would say. Thirdly, a Japan that is economically thriving, that's viable, that's vibrant, that's growing, is hugely valuable to the United States and to the region. So the direction that Japan seeks to go is very much the direction that we would like it to go in. What we tell Japan, in addition to this and our encouragement, includes another important point, which is that Japan's history dictates a high degree of sensitivity to the concerns of Japan's neighbors, and that the understanding, particularly of another important U.S. treaty ally, the Republic of Korea, that an understanding by Korea of what Japan stands for and where Japan seeks to go rests in part on Japan's ability to show that it has indeed come to terms with its past, and that it is a true friend and a responsible neighbor and partner. So the meeting that President Obama hosted in The Hague in March on the margins of a nuclear security summit with Prime Minister Abe of Japan and President Park of Korea was hugely important in bringing these two leaders together and galvanizing and catalyzing the reconciliation process that continues now and over time will be so important. Thank you.
Do the assets, military assets that we have in the region, plus what we may be adding, constitute a containment policy?
No. And the question is, why not, I think. The simplest answer is this. If you want to know what containment looks like, dial your time machine back to the 1950s and the 1960s. Containment is a deliberate strategy to isolate and ultimately destroy an adversary. We did that. We pursued that policy against the USSR. You all know what it looks like. Our China policy looks nothing like our policy towards the Soviet Union. And if our military strategy were to contain China, our deployments would look very, very different than they look like today. We are not, in the 21st century, in the business of building new big bases anywhere in Asia. We're not even in the business of building small bases anywhere in Asia. The landmark expanded defense or enhanced defense cooperation agreement that President Obama concluded in the Philippines, the landmark agreement with Australia about rotational forces, was all about access for the kinds of U.S. military elements that are needed in an emergency, needed in a crisis, needed in a natural disaster. And natural disasters, frankly, are where we have done the vast majority of our military operations, certainly in the 5+ years that I've been back in Washington. Our presence in the Asia-Pacific region is not to fight a war with China. Our presence is to keep the peace in Asia-Pacific. That's what we do, and we're pretty good at it. We've had experience. The presence of U.S. military, particularly the 7th Fleet and our naval operations, provides a framework of reassurance well beyond just maintaining order and defending against piracy and crime. It prevents arm races in the region, and it develops a culture of cooperation and interoperability. We invite China to participate in our major naval exercise RIMPAC off of San Diego. We coordinate and cooperate with China and with other countries in the region in a range of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief exercises. The U.S. military and the U.S. Navy is present in the Western Pacific because we are welcome there. And I think we are the net contributor to the stability and the security that has allowed China to prosper and achieve the extraordinary levels of economic growth and development that we've seen over the last few decades.
The question is, if China is truly expansionist, if it is, how can we possibly contain it?
Well, with apologies, I just can't accept the premise. It's not our strategy to contain China. It is not our intention or expectation that we will contest world dominance with China, nor are we in the 20th century, or for that matter, the 19th century billiards table model in which, as Mao and Stalin tried, and perhaps as Nixon succeeded, we need to work one of those two countries against the other. Our strategy and our policy in the Asia-Pacific region has in it an important place for China, and that place is, I think, governed by a bilateral relationship in which we have made and continue to make tremendous investments. We are simply not in the business of undermining China. As the President said recently, I think in NPR interview, that the U.S. has more to fear from an unstable and weak, a deteriorating China, than we do from a thriving and a strong China. I completely agree with that. The issue of the U.S. relationship with Russia is a complicated topic that I'm not going to venture deeply into. But there is no contradiction, in my view, between having strong, stable, and productive relations with China and managing the challenges that are currently presented by the behavior of the Russian government under Vladimir Putin.
We'd like very much to thank you for a nice presentation.
Thank you.